So thank y'all for giving me the opportunity to chat with y'all. By all means, feel free to jump in, ask questions, either via chat or otherwise. So as I talked with you all about earlier, the Feet on the Street campaign is sort of the deployment of our anti-contamination kits. And so I wanted to quickly share my screen just to make sure you knew where to find it. So I'm going to do that now. And so if you go to our website, recyclingpartnership.org, under recycling coordinators, you'll see fight contamination, which seems very apt. That's exactly what we're talking about. So that's what we want to do. And then you'll see curbside, drop off, a MRF survey. And this is a video kind of showing exactly what happens, crews walking down the street, lifting the lid, a visual inspection. We never ask our crews to actually go through the bin. It's always a visual inspection. That's just for timeliness and for safety. And so then if you click on one of these, whichever one you're interested in, we do ask for your information. One, it'll put you on our newsletter. You can always unsubscribe, but it's helpful for us to see from where around the country people are thinking about this and looking to work on contamination issues. So after you submit, you'll be able to download the full kit. And then here they are. It is literally a step-by-step. You get a slide or two. Anything you see in pink here is a link. It will take you to where, to give you that resource automatically. So the kit is sort of an all-inclusive, document. If you download the one kit, you will be linked to assessment tools, MRF surveys, campaign builders and designs, things like that. If you ever have a problem, certainly reach out to me. But that's the idea. Is we want it to work for you as easy as possible. And it just sort of goes literally step by step. You would want to get with your local officials, DPW, streets, recycling, whoever kind of runs your program, and just talk about this. Just read through it, figure out where you are, what you need, and then do the work. And so I'd love to either ask questions. We can go through some of these or answer questions. We can go through some of these if you want. Or I was in the last one, we just sort of chatted a bit. So I would love to hear what y'all's thoughts are and take it from there. So does anyone have any questions? I didn't think I should lead too much. I'd love to hear from y'all. Has anyone on this call done any anti-contamination work in your local communities?
Vincent, I was muted, and I wanted to tell you that I thought your resources were exceptional. It's something that those of us in the business have talked about and tried to invent and reinvent. And when you take those things to the customer, those tags and those educational materials, you run the risk of offending some people with the language and the presentation, sometimes the color of the document. And I was looking through yours and was really impressed with how inoffensive those instructional materials were, because sometimes it's a bit of a reprimand, and I really liked the way you did it. You said, hey, we love you, but you can't be putting that stuff in the container. So I really like the way the presentation of it, and I can tell there's a lot of thought in that.
Yeah, thank you. And so we take it really seriously that recycling is it's a suite across a country of millions and millions of individual behaviors, and you want to speak to that individual. So as we know from sort of like social science and psychology settings, like positive reinforcement is almost always more effective. And so we do want to, we say partnership is in our name for a reason. We do want to connect with folks individually. We want to connect with your community and really meet you where you are. And so so yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I'm glad you sort of noticed, because that's been a big factor. And that's why we push our education materials so strongly. One is that so we can have kind of a unified language around how we talk about contamination, how we talk about recycling, but also just a lot of communities don't have the bandwidth or the resources to go around and build a campaign from scratch. And so we wanted to do that for y'all. And so I'm so glad that you had a chance to look through it and that you liked it, because that's exactly the feedback we want. So here, I can stop sharing so y'all don't have to just look at random PDF slides. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Happy to dig in with y'all as much as you like.
So we used here in Broken Arrow, use your resources. When I started, essentially I was training a brand new recycling inspector and educator, and we went through all those documents and all the links and printed out everything and used all your suggestions, and then our MRF burnt down. So now we are going to get back in action here at the end of December. So now it's like a re-education process, because in the meantime, they've been using the recycling card as trash, even though our messaging details not to. Have you dealt with another municipality that went through this? And I mean, I know constant education is always the game, but do you have any specific tips on how we can re-educate or get them back on board so we avoid contamination when it opens back up?
So that does happen a lot with communities, particularly through this last year, where several programs shut down temporarily for various reasons, whether it's safety. We've had several MRF fires, just as described. And so how do we, to re-educate, it really needs to be maybe a bit of a blitz. I would want to put something on your website, put a press release. If you could have not only elected officials talking about it, but kind of trusted community members. That can be anyone from a coach to a pastor to whoever runs your local YMCA, like just whoever is important in your community, kind of get them on board as ambassadors. And I think I would try to kind of be upfront with the community and say, look, we know this has been happening. This is a change, and now we're ready to get it going again. And so I wouldn't focus too much on, don't use your recycling can this way, and say, here's how you do use it. It's people much prefer to hear what they can do and what you want them to do, instead of what they can't do and what you don't want them to do. So that positive messaging, I would frame as much as you can as a positive message, and to not shy away from it, to say, yeah, we had a change, we understand, and we're asking you to do something else now. And there's going to be kind of some growing pains there. There's going to be a period where you're going to have to, as much as you can, do some individualized feedback. This sounds like a great time to, if you have the resources, to do a feet on the street campaign, honestly, which of course I'm kind of hawking my own wares here. But at a moment when you specifically want to sort of re-educate and maybe change some behaviors in your resident, I would kind of attack that head on. And so having just a few weeks of a tight rejection policy, you let everyone know, say, look, we're back on board, our recycling is back up, we're back to our old standards. And then you start rejecting collection based on those standards. I think folks will get sort of back into their old groove of things, but it's going to take resources on your part. You're going to get 311 calls. You're going to get, folks are going to have some feelings about it, and hopefully you'll be able to weather those, because it's always a bit of an uncomfortable change to like jumpstart a program that you had to pause.
Thank you. I'll probably reach out to you as well because we have not adopted the rejection process yet. We are like the nice parents saying like, it's okay, just do better next time. But kind of want to see some numbers if maybe we can prove or demonstrate that it might be better to actually reject.
Yeah, it's I totally hear you on that, and it can be a little uncomfortable for communities, but as always, we really kind of tie this back to the individual and to a behavior. And so to reject really puts that behavior front and center to your residents. Oftentimes, you know, they'll call you and they'll say, hey, you didn't pick up my recycling. And if you use one of the benefits of our tag app is that you can ask them for their address. You can look it up really quick and you can say, oh, actually, we didn't pick that up because we saw you had plastic bags and a water hose in there. If you get those items back out, we'll be sure to pick it up next week. And so that really, you know, if you can get the resident to actually clean up their own recycling cart, it just really puts it in their brain what is and isn't acceptable. But you're right, it's hard, and we can give you those numbers about programs that did reject and didn't, and hopefully work with you to make a case to either your DPW supervisor, whoever is hesitant about that kind of policy change. We can give you some talking points to help you hopefully get over that hump.
Thank you.
Yeah, and glad you're on here. Broken Arrow, we don't have a ton of programs and projects that we've worked on in Oklahoma. Broken Arrow is certainly one of them, and I'd love to have, you know, more. So tell your neighbors. Anyone else? Do any of the folks on this call, we got a few minutes left, anyone track your contamination rate, your participation rate, or are y'all all pretty comfortable with some of those top tier metrics that we consider to be so important, or maybe not yet? I'd be curious what, you know, some of the Oklahoma communities, how they approach.
I think Paul and I both get a report from our trucking company monthly, and then an annual report that gives us participation rates and contamination rates. And I think it's audited twice a year. Is that right, Paul?
All right, that's pretty good. Twice a year. I like that. Have you found ways to kind of turn that into something actionable? How do you respond when you see contamination goes up or participation goes down? Or is that just sort of go in the back of your head as a piece of data to keep in mind?
The audit is done on the MRF floor, you know, and so coming straight out of the truck. So it's not a door-to-door campaign. However, they did do a door-to-door campaign here recently, and they found it to be a socioeconomic problem, that income levels determine contamination rates. And surprisingly, if I remember right, please don't quote me on this because I may be wrong, but surprisingly, they found higher contamination rates in the higher income levels. And, you know, that surprised me. I thought it would be the opposite of that, but that's what they found. So, and that's on a one-on-one basis. I think the cumulative effect may not have proven that true, but on the individual basis, that's what they found.
Yeah, wow, that is really interesting. It usually is the opposite. And so my impression is, I wonder if those homes were sort of wish cycling. They understand that recycling is important and they're trying to recycle more. That's one reason why we really focus on kind of putting the pictures on our materials, because it's hard for folks aren't usually going to read a whole long list of do's and don'ts. And so if you say, oh, well, you know, we recycle paper and fiber products, that may not be true of every paper and fiber product. And so, but if you really see the picture, or and of course, plastic is the hardest one. No one says, oh, we recycle plastic, because that's just going to open up a universe of contamination. But a lot of people don't necessarily know off the top of their head what PET is, for instance. And so, yeah, I don't think wish cycling is as big of an issue kind of under the umbrella of contamination, but it certainly happens. And oftentimes those customers or residents can kind of be the hardest to convince, because they're like, oh no, I know recycling is important. I recycle. Look at all this stuff I recycle. It's like, well, yeah, not quite. So yeah, that's a conundrum there that rears its head every now and again.
Well, the most common, I heard somebody else mention this yesterday, the most common response I get, well, when I lived in Sacramento, we did this. When I lived in Oregon, we did that. Or when I lived in Cleveland, we picked up everything and that kind of thing. And it's hard to determine whether or not they carried their bad habits here or they actually did collect, number 7 plastic. So you never know. But I hear a lot of it, not quite as often as I used to, but I still hear a lot of that.
Yeah, so recycling is one of those industries that, despite how big it is, I think last I saw it's like $120 billion industry. It is almost all the feedstock, really, or most of it. Of course, we're talking about residential, not commercial, but it's managed locally. There are very few national strategies, national policies. Some of that's being worked on. I'm not a policy guru, so I can't speak too much to it. But what a lot of people don't understand is, despite how ubiquitous recycling is, we have 10,000 communities in the United States, 10,000 different jurisdictions, and almost all of them manage their recycling programs individually. And residents, when they say, oh, I recycled in San Francisco, I'm going to recycle, in Ada, Oklahoma, recycling, same word, I'm going to do the same thing. And it's hard to tell them sometimes that these are 2 different programs, 2 different priorities, 2 different haulers, 2 different, it's different all the way across the board. And so, yeah, really driving home to folks, like, recycling isn't the same everywhere is tough, but that's just our reality and something we've got to work on. All right, we've got about 3.5 minutes left. Anyone else got something top of mind?
Vincent, I heard something recently that I thought was interesting. We had a lunch and learn with one of our haulers not that long ago, and she said in her audits that people that had a second recycling bin often have the most contamination. I thought was interesting, but in her rationale, it seemed like they were using it more as a second trash can than actually generating enough recycling to fill a second bin. I'm sure bin size matters, but I found that very interesting. I wondered if you or any of our other municipality folks on here have seen that as well.
I'll see what a municipality says, and then I'll answer it. I'd love to see if someone else has a thought first.
I think, Sarah, that when somebody asks for a second recycling bin, I admonish them a little bit and tell them, hey, you need to consider what Michael talked about yesterday, how you're shopping. You need to look at what you're doing there at the cash register, because it's giving you license to generate more waste, and the whole idea behind this was to reduce. So I kind of look at that as almost shame on you. You shouldn't be generating that much waste. You're way above the average producer, you're double. So those bins are a certain size for a reason. It's the national average, 95 gallons or whatever it is. So that's something that troubles me. And I do try to, every time somebody, believe it or not, pretty good sized town here, and every time somebody calls for a second recycle bin, I try to have a conversation with them, and politely ask them to consider what they're doing there.
I love that. Anyone else? So I think that's great. We have found that a 96-gallon cart is just as effective for a weekly or every other week program. And so there is, I think you're exactly right to say that that often warrants a conversation. And sometimes it, we've had people, I've heard of folks asking for a second recycling bin because they're often free when what they actually need is a second trash cart. And so there is sort of you can sometimes have a backwards incentive structure there because we want to incentivize recycling, of course, always. But so yeah, that happens. And so generally, if they're needing a second 96-gallon cart, that kind of raises a flag. If they need a second 18-gallon bin, if you're the more laundry hamper size, I can see filling up an 18-gallon bin. But yeah, if a family of 2 to 4 or 5 needs a second recycling cart, maybe that's the case. But I think there's a conversation to have there. And yeah, it's hard to get away from that convenience factor. Someone has something to throw away, they're going to throw it somewhere.
Yeah, I think you're right on or whoever mentioned that the second bin is often free. And so maybe that's why they're asking for it. It's certainly a deterrent there, but yeah, I was surprised. And I think through COVID and in the days of online shopping and everything arriving in a box, I do see my personal bin filling up faster with cardboard more than anything. My trash is still small. So.
Yeah, residential trash rates increased, I think on average, like 30 to 40%, but some communities saw huge increases. And cardboard is a great kind of solid base to your recycling system, but boy, does it take up some room, especially when you're getting, folks don't always want to break them down all the way either. You really don't want to come down hard on breaking down a box, but it's actually really important.